See if this works. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, very visible.
Okay.
So
And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry about those technical glitches.
No problem. You can start.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So again, my apologies. So sorry about all that. Computers. Huh? Okay, so first of all, just want to say I'm really glad to be able to do this. This is a real privilege and an honor. Hello, everyone. I think I should just crack straight on, right? I should just get right in about what I want to talk about today, which is about where we are and where we're going, the present and the future. And when I think about the present, like where we are right now in the world, it does sometimes feel kind of like the future. Like it feels like we're living in a science fictional present. I'm sorry, Keynote has stopped responding. I'm still having technical issues. There we go. Wait a minute. There we go. Keynote's going crazy on me. Sorry about this. I'm just going to, okay. So as I was saying, boom, come on, Keynote, you can do this. There we go. That sometimes the present feels kind of like a future, right? Like it feels like we're living in some kind of science fiction scenario with self-driving cars and drones and AI, AR and VR and the blockchain, right? And sometimes when I'm, looking at this science fictional present we seem to be living in, I'm not sure exactly what kind of science fiction story we're in. Like, is this a utopia or is this a dystopia? Is this a dream or a nightmare? Science fictional present. And I wonder if it's a matter of perspective, like how we look at things determines whether something is utopian or dystopian, whether something is a dream or a nightmare. Because I find, so my attitude to technology, it tends to be kind of mixed. There's sometimes I get excited about some technologies, but a lot of the time I'm really apprehensive, right? I'm really a bit nervous and even fearful of some technologies. I've been trying to analyze this and figure out why this is. Why do I feel sometimes excitement, but a lot of times apprehension about technology? And there's one possible answer to this about why I feel apprehension about technology. And this is something that Douglas Adams said a while back. I'll quote from him. He said, "Anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just a natural part of the way the world works. And anything that's invented between when you're 15 and when you're 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. And anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things." So maybe that's it, right? Maybe that's why I feel this apprehension or even fear is just, I'm old. Simple as that. But I'm not sure that is the case because, like I say, I do sometimes get excited about technologies too. So what is it? What makes the difference? And when I talk about technologies, I'm not just talking about, self-driving cars and AI and AR and VR and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about, when we're building websites, it feels like there's a lot of technologies being thrown at us all the time. And it feels really, really overwhelming. And there's so much to keep up with. So there's a friend of mine, Frank Cameron, he wrote this great essay. He's been building websites for a long time as well, like maybe 20 years or so. And he said, I wonder if I have 20 years of experience making websites or if it's really 5 years of experience repeated 4 times, right? Because it does feel like every 5 years, we have to completely learn everything new again. And maybe that's part of the root of this apprehension I feel sometimes about technology. Because I feel if this was the way that we got from the present to the future, with a nice, steady curve, then that would be fine. I would feel okay with this upgrade path. But too often it just feels like this, right? It feels like we're really like zooming in with the amount of technology we gotta learn. So the issue isn't so much change. I don't think I fear change. What I fear is the rapid rate of change, or I find it really overwhelming when there's a rapid rate of change. Now, if we're going to talk about rates of change, there's an idea I want to bring up here, and it's an idea from architecture. It's from a book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand. And in this book, he talks about the work of a British architect called Frank Duffy, who had this idea of shearing layers. And Frank Duffy said that a building, properly conceived, is several layers of longevity. Right? So here, he points out that the site that a building sits upon, we're talking about geological timescales, right? Thousands of years potentially. The structure you want to hold together for centuries. And then inside you've got the walls, they could change every few decades. The infrastructure is like the plumbing, you want to change that out every few years. And you've got the right down to the furniture inside a room that you can move around on a daily basis. So the pace of change of these different layers of the building, shearing layers, is different. And what I also find interesting is that each layer depends on the layer below. Right? You can't have furniture in a room until you've got the walls and doors of the room. You can't have the room until you've got the structure of the building. And you can't have the structure of a building without having a site to put the building on. So I find this a really interesting idea, this idea of shearing layers. And Stuart Brand took this idea from architecture and he applied it to, well, just about everything. He coined a term called pace layers and pointed out that most systems operate in this kind of way, where there's layers of paces of change. And here he's mapped it out onto, well, the human race, right? Our species has these kind of different rates of change. The lowest level is our physiological nature, which, doesn't change for tens of thousands of years. Physiologically, there's no difference between a caveman and an astronaut. And then you've got culture, which takes centuries. It takes, centuries of accumulation of knowledge. Governance should move not too fast, right? You don't want revolutions. You want it to be, changing. You don't want it to be static, but don't want to change too fast. Infrastructure and commerce is obviously quite fast moving, right? Generally thinking timescales of years or months. And then finally, fashion. And by fashion, he's talking about popular culture, art and pop music and all this stuff. And the whole point of what he's calling fashion is that it's supposed to move fast and it's supposed to try things out. Right? What about this? No, what about that? To move really quickly and discard things equally quickly. So talking about this model of pace layers, Stuart Brand said, fast learns, but slow remembers. Fast proposes and slow disposes. And fast is discontinuous, but slow is continuous. And fast and small instructs slow and big by accrued innovation and occasional revolution, but slow and big controls the small and fast by constraint and constancy. And here's the interesting thing. He says, fast gets all our attention, but slow has all the power. So I find this interesting because I think this would begin to explain why I sometimes feel excitement and sometimes feel apprehension. And maybe the excitement is when technology is moving at the right pace of change. And the apprehension, I feel, is when something is moving at the wrong rate, either too quickly or too slowly. So I've been, again, trying to analyze what things do I get excited about and what things do I get apprehensive about? Or not even apprehensive, but I'm just kind of meh about some things while I get really excited about others. And I bet you're the same, right? Some things excite you more than others. So one of the things I've been thinking about is this idea of materials and tools. When it comes to building on the web, I still get very excited about materials, and I tend not to care quite as much when it comes to the tools. I don't find myself getting excited. So when I talk about materials, I'm literally talking about the materials we use to build a web: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I still get excited when there's new additions to HTML or new CSS features and new JavaScript APIs landing in browsers. And then we've got the tools, and these are all great, but I just don't get as excited by them as I do by the materials. These are all tools to help you produce the materials, right? So in this case, I've listed some, transpilers, preprocessors, build tools, version control, all that stuff is there to help you produce the materials. Now, what's interesting about this sort of category of tools I've listed here, preprocessors, transpilers, all that stuff, is that they all kind of sit on your computer, right? And what they produce at the end is still going to be the materials, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I feel that when it comes to choosing these kind of tools, which version control system, which preprocessor, which build tool, your attitude can kind of be like, hey, whatever you want, whatever works for you, whatever works for your team. That's what's important, because at the end of the day, it's still just producing materials, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, there's a different category of tools, I think, when we're talking about frameworks and libraries and things like that, because these are tools that are built with the materials. They're still producing materials, but they're built with the materials. So a CSS framework is built in CSS, and a JavaScript library is built in JavaScript. And so what that means is that for you to get the benefit of this tool, the end user has to download the tool first, right? Because it's delivered over the wire, if we're talking about client-side JavaScript here. And so I feel like we can't quite apply the same rationale here as we would with the other tools. With the other tools, you can just say, yeah, use whatever you want, it's fine. But with these, it's more like, maybe we need to be a bit pickier. Maybe we need to consider the effects of making the user pay a tax so that we get the benefit, we as developers, right? And the other thing is, I have to say, one of the reasons why I tend not to get as excited by any of these frameworks, though they're all great, is when you've been making things for a long time, you learn not to get too attached to any one framework, because you know it's only a matter of time before another framework comes along. And I kind of like to treat these as cattle, not pets, right? Don't get too attached. They move at a faster pace layer than the materials of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And looking at it, stepping back a bit, I noticed something else is these materials, things like new JavaScript APIs, new CSS features, new additions to HTML, these are things that directly benefit the end user. And maybe that's why I get excited about them. Whereas tools that help us as developers, they don't have a direct benefit to the end user. There's an indirect benefit, obviously, in that anything that helps us work faster is good for the user. But in terms of directly benefiting the user, these tools don't have quite the same direct effects. In fact, sometimes, in terms of bandwidth and download, perhaps they could even be a burden on the end user. So this does help me get my head around these different feelings that I have of sometimes excitement and sometimes apprehension. And it's all to do with pace layers. So this pace layer model, I think I can use it to kind of map out the materials we use to build a web, or literally how the web was made. Because right at the bottom, you've got the internet itself, right? TCP/IP, and that's been around for decades, right? It's been around since, the 1980s? And then on top of that, you've got HTTP, which Tim Berners-Lee created when he created the World Wide Web. Now, this has changed over time. We do have HTTP2, but that took decades, right? That took a long time. And that feels right. It feels right that this isn't something we want to change too quickly. We want to slowly evolve it. Then we have URLs. Now, I would love it if URLs were unchanging, if URLs never broke, right? But the truth is, URLs break all the time, but we can do our best to try to keep them alive and keep them online for as long as possible. Now we're getting into the materials, and HTML does change. I mean, over the decades, we've got many more HTML elements than were originally created, but it doesn't change too quickly. I mean, the last big change was HTML5, and that's like 8 years ago now. So it's easy to keep up, I think, with the pace of change in HTML. CSS does change quicker. We get new stuff like Flexbox and Grid, and that's great. But it still feels like manageable. I feel like, yeah, I can cope with the pace of change. And then there's JavaScript. And I don't just mean the language, but I mean the whole ecosystem of which library are we using this week, which framework is hip, right? And that's where the change of pace is really, really fast, right? Like, since I've started giving this talk, I think 2 JavaScript libraries have been released, okay? But when I see this mapped to these pace layers, this helps me come to terms with feeling overwhelmed by the pace of change of JavaScript frameworks. Because now I understand, it's supposed to move fast. It's the whole point. Remember, fast is supposed to try stuff out. And what about this? No, what about that? Right? It's the fashion kind of part. And when I understand that, then it makes me feel a bit better about maybe being a bit overwhelmed. I'm like, it's okay. No one's supposed to be able to keep track of all of this stuff. It's supposed to move fast. And then the stuff that works, we'll end up keeping in one of those lower layers, right? Stuff gets tried out in JavaScript and then finds its way down into the more like steady pace layers. So it used to be, if you wanted to do rollover effect, you had to use JavaScript, and now you just use CSS. And it used to be, if you wanted to validate a form, for a required field, you'd have to use JavaScript, but now you can use HTML, right? So fast proposes and slow disposes. Now it's a testament. So this layering of technologies, right? This is how I think it makes sense to build for the web, is to think of each layer in turn. Think about the URLs first, and think about your HTML, and think about the CSS, then apply the JavaScript. But it's a testament to the flexibility of the web that you don't have to build this way. In fact, if you wanted, you could build like this, where you literally just have something that's on the internet and you just do everything in JavaScript, right? And like I said, that's a testament to the flexibility of the web. Now, this, for example, would be the architecture of a single page app. And you can choose to build this way. And what you end up with is something that either works great or doesn't work at all. And that's fine, I suppose. And in other mediums, this makes total sense. So if you were building for native apps, for example, this is exactly how it works. If you build an iOS app and I have an iOS device, then it works great. If you build an iOS app and I have an Android device, then it just doesn't work at all. You can't install an iOS app on an Android device, right? And we can build like that on the web if we choose to. But by using the layered approach, I feel like we really get to get the best out of the web, which is to build something like this, where it doesn't just jump from not working at all to working great, but there's layers of how well it works. You build something that just about works. Maybe it's just HTML, right? And then you layer on the extra stuff, the styles, the JavaScript, and you start to get further up until it works great. And the point is, if something goes wrong along the way, you don't just drop down to it doesn't work at all, but maybe it just works fine now. Or maybe it just about works, right? And so maybe not everyone's going to get 100% it works great, but the chances are no one's going to get the doesn't work at all. You're going to get something in between. So instead of it being this leap from doesn't work to works great, it can be a curve, right? And when you can take users along that curve as well. And if they slide back down, they'll slide back down to something that's still acceptable. And we tend not to build this way, right? When we're building on the web, we tend to think of it as either it works or it doesn't work. And I wonder whether that's to do with our tools, in that we design something, we design it in a very precise way. We design like the perfect version. This is how it looks when everything works great. And then that's what we try and build. And I wonder if, we should be getting closer to the materials, doing more of the, if not designing in the browser, than what Dan Moll calls deciding in the browser, right? Or as Ethan Marcotte said, I like privileging prototypes, not pictures, right? So effectively what we're talking about is going from something low fidelity to high fidelity. Instead of starting with the high fidelity, here's the perfect mock-up, start with, what's the basic functionality something's got to do, and then layer on each layer and build up to that. So instead of taking this approach where, okay, something's on the internet and then we just build everything with JavaScript, I like to build like this. Take each of those materials and design them and build them and then layer on the next bit. And this is the layers of the web, right? I'm going to quote Ethan Marcotte again. He said, I like designing in layers. I love looking at the design of a page, a pattern, whatever, and thinking about how it'll change if, say, fonts aren't available, or JavaScript doesn't work, or someone doesn't see the design as you and I might, and is having the page read aloud to them, right? So that way, instead of it being this, binary choice between, either something works great or doesn't work at all, the truth is, there's a much more of a gray area in between. And I think this is the reality. This is what the world is actually like. There's a lot of gray areas. And we like dividing things into, this might work for very simple sites, but it's not going to work for a complex, application. We like to divide things into being either simple or complex. But again, I think that's not the way the world works. The world is much more nuanced and gray than that. But we do really like dividing things into two, right? So we can go from something being simple to being complex by layering on the complexity bit by bit. Now, some people will say, yeah, this is fine for websites, but it's not going to work for web apps, to which I say I've yet to have a good definition of what a web app is. But anyway, again, here we are dividing the whole web into two categories, websites and web apps. And I think this is actually what the web is like. It's a lot of gray area. How do you define when something stops being a website, starts being a web app? What even is a web app? And I kind of want to embrace the gray areas, right? Embrace the fact that there's a bit of everything in there. And like I said, I don't think we can even define what a web app is, which is a bit different to progressive web app, which we've heard about quite a bit already at the conference. Jason was talking about this yesterday, and as he points out, I think progressive web app has a fairly clear definition from a technical point of view, which is it's running on HTTPS, it has a web app manifest, and it has a service worker. And if you have a website that fulfills those three criteria, you have a progressive web app. And so that's interesting. What that means is you can start with a regular website and layer on each one of those things, and it becomes a progressive web app. It's not an either or. You can take your existing website and layer this stuff on. But what I had to realize when I started to get my head around service workers and building with offline capabilities was this model I've had in my head for 20 years of how the web works, that you build in these layers. I suddenly had to come to terms with the idea that you could build something like this, where you still got the materials, you still got URLs, and it works, but the internet part has gone away. Like there's no internet connection, and yet the website still works. This blew my mind. It took me a while to get my head around this idea. But when I did, I started to think about how can I take existing websites and layer on this functionality in such a way that, again, that it improves the end user experience. I'm thinking much more about users than developers here. So, for example, I built this website, huffduffer.com, which is about making your own podcast of episodes you put together. And it did the most basic thing you can do with a service worker, really, which is just create an offline page, right? So now if you're offline, instead of getting the browser telling you, oh, you're offline, it's the website saying, oh, you're offline. So that's super basic. It's almost like having a custom 404 page, right? It's maybe a branding opportunity, but not much more. You can have fun with this. Trivago, which is a progressive web app, if you lose your internet connection when you're using Trivago, it gives you a game to play, the offline maze. So that's kind of cute, right? You get to, like I say, maybe introduce a little bit of delight into an experience that would normally be quite frustrating. It's very basic. Now, at the other end of the scale, here's this website, resilientwebdesign.com. This is a book I wrote, and it's available for free. If you go to the website, that is the book. The book is the website. And here's how it looks when you're online. And now, here's how it looks when you're offline. It's exactly the same. So what happens is when you visit this website, the whole thing is downloaded. The entire website is downloaded. And now it'll never go to the network again. It'll always look in the cache. And that's very extreme. Now, you really can't do that for many kinds of websites, because the whole point of most websites is that their information is dynamic and constantly changing, and you don't want to serve up something that might be stale. But in the case of a book, this offline first approach actually makes sense, right? You just visit the website once, and now it doesn't matter whether you're on an airplane or where you are, you can still read the book in a web browser, even though the internet part has gone away. But usually what you want is somewhere in between these extremes. On my own website, as you browse around the website, you might be reading articles. It's sort of putting those articles into a cache as you go, so that then if you do lose the internet connection, you get the custom offline page saying, sorry, you're offline, but here's some stuff that you were reading earlier and you can revisit and read again. And that's okay, but of course, the only things you can visit now are things you've already read, probably. So it's okay, but it's not great. Where you can take it further is to give the user the choice of what they want to save for offline. And it doesn't even have to be text. It could be other media. So this website, archive.deconstruct.org, has the audio from 10 years of a conference we used to run called Deconstruct. And as you browse around the site, you can listen to the audio, and there's this option that it says save offline. And you toggle that option, and now it's saving the MP3 into a cache. So that when you lose your internet connection, you're on your airplane or whatever, now when you visit the website, it says, sorry, you're offline, custom offline page. But it also says, here's what you saved for offline, right? So you're really giving the control over to the user. And so there's all these different sort of patterns and ideas you can use service workers for. There's no one size fits all. You've got kind of thinking about ways to layer it on. And you can begin with something as simple as caching, custom offline page. Maybe it gets added to the home screen like an app, push notifications, background sync, all this stuff. Think of it all as layers. And that's how we'll get from where we are now to the future is by layering on these technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for the wonderful session. So, time for questions. Any questions? No questions. All right. No questions for you, Jeremy. Thank you very much.